If you could drop your name and where you teach or your school or district and why you became a social studies teacher into the chat. So just like the top reason or two. I am also a total history nerd, Linda, right there with you.
I'm not as much of a history nerd. I'm more of a nerd about learning. And I guess, Bridget, we should introduce
Yeah,
ourselves.
we should really. Hi,
Yeah.
I'm Bridget O'Connor. I work for the OER project as a content manager. I'm a historian and I do a lot of the editing and writing for the OER project.
And I am Rachel Phillips. It's wonderful to see you all. I am a learning scientist. I started as a second grade teacher and then went off and got a doctorate. And I studied sort of how people learn in formal school settings with a focus on equity. And I do for OER project, I come up with a lot of our instructional practices and a lot of we do a lot of work on our activities. And then I also do a lot of our sort of eval and looking at student and teacher learning. So it's great to see everyone. Thanks for being here.
Yes, thank you. Shannon, your story is a lot like mine, I think. Oh, wait, no, sorry. It was Matt. I wasn't a huge fan of history until college. So that's a big push for me too, as a former high school teacher, to try and get kids interested in history much sooner than I was.
Angela, I'm so glad you're here. Awesome.
Hey, Rachel.
Yes, and also I just want to say at any point, Bridget and I are going to go through a bunch of slides. Bridget's going to go first. I'm going to take the second half, but don't feel free to raise your hand. Feel free to unmute and stop and ask questions. We will have a Q&A at the end, but if at any point you need some clarification or anything like that, feel free. We'll also be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions, we can also address them there as well. So whatever you're comfortable with, I believe works for us. So.
Thanks to so many of you for dropping your answers into the chat as well. They're very interesting to read. Thank you. All right, so to piggyback on our little icebreaker question, what we want to do now is get you to create your own causal map. So you're going to create a map for the causes that led you to become a social studies teacher. So you would start with social studies teacher in the center, or the red circle as we have it on the image here, and then just put the causes to the left-hand side of that and create a causal map for how you want to do this, how you want to arrange it.
I'm going to go ahead and do the same. There isn't a template. What you can do is just go ahead and you can, in the middle, usually we draw when we're looking at historical causation in the middle, we often just put the event. So for this, it would be becoming a teacher. And then, so then the map has like we have circles and connections, or, nodes and connections. And so usually I do mine from left to right, kind of like the one that's up on the screen. And you can put a bunch of different reasons of why you became a social studies teacher. And then maybe some of the consequences of that as well. Yeah, so you could use your favorite drawing tool too. For me, I've just got paper and pen. So that also works if you want to go analog.
Yeah, someone's beyond my digital skills and actually drew on the presentation. I don't know how to get that off. You're on mute, Rachel.
I was wondering if my screen had gotten wonky or my sharing wasn't working. Okay, somebody does have some major skills there.
Yeah,
I heard stories of French and Indian War of 1812. I don't know how that happened. Someone will have to teach us.
George Washington started the French and Indian War, and I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
Hi, Tom. It's nice to see you.
Good seeing you again, Bridget.
Well, you have done something that is just baffled.
I annotated. Can I erase it? My apologies.
It's okay.
I didn't realize I would show up on everybody's.
Yeah, I have here. I'm going to flip to the next slide and see what happens. Just for
Ah,
Oh, no.
we need an eraser then, eh?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, there you go. Perfect.
Amazing. I love it.
Okay. All right, we'll just give you a couple more minutes and then we can share out. So
I'm sorry, I'm
oh.
just joining. I was a little late. What have I missed? And I'm actually driving and I'm like, got a semi truck stuck in front of me. So
Okay.
I apologize.
And that's okay. It would be a little difficult to hopefully don't try this while you're driving, but you can think about it. So we're working on a causal map of the causes that led you to become a social studies teacher.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so was this an easy task? Did a lot of people just have one cause that led you to that, or were there multiple causes? Does anyone want to come off mute and share, or drop their feedback into the chat? Multiple. Okay. Did anyone have just one cause? Questionable if they're really causes. So I like that. And could you multiple from dinosaur? Thanks.
I like fate, just one.
Yeah.
Joking.
Oh, that's a good point. You had a hard time keeping it chronological. Yes, perfect. Yes, I think we all suspected that there was a better reason for why people liked history other than memorizing names and dates. Very good. Some causes were contributing and some significant and underlying causes. Great. So, and this is the problem for kids a lot of times. Kids often think monocausally, like there's one cause for one event, and the whole purpose of the causation progression really is to get them to branch out and think about how causes can be short-term, long-term, intermediate term, how there's a triggering event, if they're contributing or if they're significant, and getting them to think like that takes a lot of work on your part and a lot of practice on theirs, which is why we have developed practice progressions. So while all historical thinking practices are critical and interconnected, like pedagogically, it's helpful for students if we tease them apart so they're skilled in each when they put them together. So you want them to write a research essay at the end of the school year, and you want them to connect, continuity and change, and you want them to connect causation. So therefore, we've broken these thinking skills down into categories to help students master each one while they work through the process of integrating them. The results of this are a series of activities which are called our practice progressions, and they're based on one particular historical thinking or reasoning skill. And they build upon one another over time. So each activity in a progression is meant to be more sophisticated than the one before, and you'll see that as we work our way through the causation tool. And they challenge students along the way, but also support them as they try to do this work. And one of the main supports we provide within each progression is what we like to refer to as a thinking tool. Some people call these SMART tools. We call them thinking tools. But it could be a poster, a rubric, a graphic organizer, some sort of mnemonic device, or a mix of these, which helps students attend to the steps they should take to engage in each practice. And over time, students will tend to rely less upon the tools and more upon their own abilities as they work their way through these. So in our next bit, we're going to talk about Alphons. And so students might not be ready to do anything with historical content when you first introduce causation. So the idea is to give them a story, one that is low stakes. And this one is a fictional story about Alphonse the camel. And students read a short story about a camel named Alphonse and his horrible owner, Frank. And then they have to decide which of the causes in the story was the last straw or the straw that broke the camel's back. So I'm going to drop a link into the chat of a Google Doc that has the story and also has the tool. Oh, you struggle with Alphonse, and I think I'm always looking for the correct answer. Here we go. I mean, I'm not sure that there is one really correct answer. You can make an argument for a few of them, but we'll start out. Okay, so the link has been dropped into the chat. Sorry, I think I just dropped that to Rachel, but thank you for correcting me, Rachel. And you can go to the Google Doc, read the story, and then we'll move into breakout rooms to use the causation tool to figure out which of the causes in the story were long-term, intermediate term, and short-term, and as well as the cause that triggered Alphonse's death, or the straw that broke the camel's back.
And if folks could put their hand up sort of around the time you're done with the story, that'll give us a good sense of how long it's taking to read through.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and stop now, and then Rachel is gonna be kind enough to move you into breakout rooms where you can work together to fill out the tool.
I'm unmuted.
All right.
So before we throw you into breakout rooms, I wanted to sort of orient you to the causation tool just a little bit, so everybody kind of has a sense of what we're doing and how this works in a classroom. So typically in a classroom, you would either have students read the story of Alphonse themselves, or it is kind of a fun read aloud, with Frank the Camel Killer, and some of you can make it a little bit dramatic. We've seen some teachers act it out. You can do kinds of fun stuff. And as Bridget mentioned, what we really like about it, it's kind of this non-historical example. And most of our progressions do start out with an example that is not historical. We want to make things personally relevant for the students. We also want to give them something that's, a story, or this is like a sort of a parable, something they can hold on to that's a really nice anchor, so that down the line, partway through the year, let's say you're talking about causation and a student gets confused, for example, by role. And you could go back and you could talk about Alphonse, and kids tend to remember Alphonse and be like, remember the straw that broke the camel's back? I'm giving an answer away. I apologize. I think you were all going to get this one, but that's the triggering event, right? So we like to start with that. And what we do early in the progression is we don't ask kids in the first activity to fill out this whole tool. We're going to ask you to do that as far as you can get. But what we'll often do, for example, is, we have this tool, which is sort of a graphic organizer laid out. We hope that by the end of any progression, students don't actually need the tool anymore, that they've internalized everything, so that they feel like they have a better sense of how this all works. But depending on how you scaffold for students, which we'll talk a little bit more about after you get into the activity of different ways to do this, they don't need it anymore. But we start small. So we'll give a story. Sometimes we just introduce the tool in the first activity in a progression. Here, what we do is we tend to introduce this, and unfortunately ignore the header. This is not about revolutions. I have the wrong screenshot in here. This one is supposed to be about Alphonse, but it's really just the header. The tool doesn't change. It stays the same throughout. And in the first one, what we do is we just ask kids to list causes. So what are all the reasons you can think of why Alphonse died? And so they would just list causes somewhere. Then the second thing you'll do, and I think you all can probably in groups skip that first step, and I bet you'll be able to start immediately putting in things into short term, intermediate term, and long term. We do have some definitions for short term, intermediate term, and long term. They can be a little fuzzy, because it kind of depends on how you periodize the event. So before you start in your group, you might want to have a conversation of, are we thinking of Alphonse from the beginning of time until now? Or maybe it's 100 years, or maybe it's 1,000 years. So you might want to sort through that. And you divide into those things. And then the next thing you'll do, I can't remember exactly how the directions go, but then you will You will sometimes next go to roll. We have kids usually pretty quickly pick out the triggering event. So, the assassination of the Archduke is often the famous historical example. And this one, it is the straw that broke the camel's back. Kids don't always know the reference to the straw that broke the camel's back. A lot of them have heard their parents say this is the last straw. And then there's also a Spanish idiom that is sort of the drop of water that made the glass overflow. So there's some different ways you can kind of get that point across if kids aren't as familiar with that. And then you will over time explain role, you'll explain significance, you'll explain type, but that happens over the course of the progression, not all at once. However, we're going to challenge you in small groups to try to get further along than just the listing and see if you can start, doing some of that labeling. So with that, before I send you into small groups, we did share the Google Doc. So I recommend that somebody in the group takes notes. You might just keep them for yourself. We're not going to ask you to share your screen or anything like that. We'll discuss it when we come back and talk about what were the things that felt easy, what were the things that felt harder, and what were the things that you think your students might struggle with in using this tool. So any questions? I'm not paying great attention to the chat, but any questions before we throw you into rooms? And I know there's lots of hands raised, and I think that's from before, so you're welcome to put those down. If there's a new hand, I'm not sure, so you might want to unmute yourself if there's a question. And I apologize, my dog is snoring loudly in the background. I don't know if you can hear that. All right, terrific. All right, now I just need to find the right part of my screen. And we're going to put you in rooms of about 5 or 6 people. And we're going to give you, I think, Bridget, about 15, 20 minutes. I can't remember. You're muted, just in case.
Yeah, I think 15 minutes will work.
Outstanding.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to create rooms, and we'll broadcast a message before we bring everybody back. All right. All right, welcome back. I think so we still have some people gathering. Or no, it looks like everybody's back. All right, awesome. Well, thank you I was able to pop into a room, which was a great discussion. And before I start giving my opinion about different things, if you wanted to take a minute and either unmute yourself and talk about what your group, it can be anything that came up, but one of the things is, what do you think your students would do well with in this tool? What do you think would be harder for your students? So feel free, and it could be about just the tool, or you can comment on Alphonse as well. I know we have, Alphonse can be a little controversial, so we will talk about that.
I guess I can go for our
Thank
group.
you.
One of the things we talked about the type of factor is super helpful, but also super intimidating for students. And it wasn't Alphonse and origins to present, whatever the second causation one is that I can't remember at the moment.
Solutions, maybe.
Yeah, but there were definitely some things where we were like, I don't have enough information to determine between these couple of types. And so many, at least of my students, are in the, I must get the right answer, right? Like, and they have a hard time getting to, okay, there isn't one right answer. And as long as you can argue it, so it's almost one of those things where when I teach it, again, this is my first year using the curriculum, like if I using it next year, I'll do a separate lesson that's all about connecting and then arguing why something is this, that, or the other thing. I think could really help this tool be more useful. And I also thought that, like, while the labeling is good of how long each of the terms is, I think with Alphonse particularly, it can, at least my students got real kind of caught in by that, rather than like, I was like, no, long term could just be like before he was born or something. And they're like, no, it says 100 years. So I think kind of
Yeah,
trying to get that, either modifying, and overwriting the tool for that assignment for my students or something would help them as well.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. Thank you so much for sharing that, Larson. So a couple of things I want to comment on is yes. So first of all, we hope that you will take these tools or anything else and modify them to fit your local context. And so that's why we wanted to share that Google Doc link. Like, you should absolutely make modifications. So sometimes I think people look at the curriculum and they feel like it's a little, maybe parts of it. I don't think generic is the right word, but but we really try to make it because it's important to modify for your local context, and we're not going to be able to do it right for everyone. And so I would say don't hesitate to take those labels off and just give short, intermediate, and long, and decide based on the scenario that you're looking at what those might be and how they might change. The other thing, and I've never actually tried this, but I do wonder what would happen if you changed out the type. Maybe as a class, you could decide, hey, maybe you won't, first of all, there's a lot there. There's 8. So sometimes you might want to give fewer, or you might want to come to your own class definitions about those. So I love the idea of maybe we would just do a separate lesson. Well, and then that's not separate lesson on that, but I think you could do a lesson on type, or do something fun with that. And then I also think the idea of a separate lesson on, how to defend that, how to make a claim, defend it, all of that is really great. And I think it has a nice connection to claim testing. And then, the other thing I just want to comment on, and I'm going to let somebody else go, is, a lot of people have commented in the chat and other places, and even in the room, I was like, we want the right answer, right? And most of us who are teachers, we're probably good at school, and we crave the just what's the right or wrong answer. And that's actually what I love and hate about Alphonse, is that there really isn't a right answer. And it's also one of the reasons I really like starting with this, because it gives all kinds of students an opportunity to be successful. And so if they can come up, if they come up with a cause, and it might be a little outlandish, but again, if they can explain why they think it's a cause, then I think early on, you count those things and you kind of let them dig in with this sort of easier example. So that's why I kind of like to start with that. Now, I know not everybody loves the story of Alphonse. You can use other stories that you can find, and it will work out fine. We just happen to be fans of our camel. Any other things that came up in groups that you thought, your students might be attracted to or might have some trouble with?
Well, not on that, but to what you were saying a few minutes ago, history is, analyzing evidence, collecting, organizing, posing claims, and arguing that, right? And the claim is something that is not a right answer. It has to be controversial. It has to be something that you can argue. So if anything, I like your story of the camel because it shows that life is too complex to fit in neat categories like economic, government, political, all of these things. And that's just humanity. So it shows the complexity of you can argue each point, and things don't fit into nice, neat boxes, and that's just the reality.
Yep. Well put. Thank you.
Another thing that came up in our group, similarly to what you were saying, Rachel, and Larson brought this up at the end, it was about defining short-term, intermediate, and long-term. And somebody in our group said that whole thing would have just been a lesson before even getting to Alphonse. And so I think that's also really important because that's something I have to do with my students. But I was telling my group, I feel like I was cheating a little bit because I've used Alphonse and my kids love it. And I use it with my 9th graders who are World 1 kids, and then AP World again in 10th grade. And so that, especially coming back to it, they are now understanding, okay, so here's why we did causation, here's how we're going to use it. And then we talked a little bit about how then people were talking about how they would actually do this. And I was telling people I used post-it notes for it because it gets the kids a little up and about. And somebody else mentioned a great idea, which I'm totally going to steal, using boxes and building them up, using it to actually create a structure. And that's so cool, I think, too, as well. So I don't remember if your name, but if you want to shout yourself out with that, that was a great idea, and I'm going to steal it.
Yes, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that idea.
Hi, that was me.
Awesome.
So yeah, it's been a while since I've been in the classroom. I now work for our Department of Ed, but one of the things that I did was I found, especially with my lower end kids, using some kind of manipulative to place things in order with causes, and whether that even be just like cutting up papers, or I would use hexagons a lot for them to try and make those relationships. But one of the things I did, talking about kind of causes of the Civil War, was I found a company that had just like plain little cardboard boxes that were like the shape of a brick. And so I bought, I don't know, a few hundred of them for a pretty reasonable price. And then the kids all had to pick which boxes, were making it. And then they had to build the boxes. And it gave this really great visual, and no one's walls looked exactly the same, which was fantastic. So it was really interesting. I would have to look and find the link for it. I'll see if I can, and I can place that in the chat. But it was a fun exercise. And again, I found doing things a lot with some visuals, as well as some of the graphic organizers and things like that, were very helpful too. So
Awesome. Thank you, Linda. That's a fabulous suggestion that I don't think we've heard before. And it resonates a lot. It makes me think about Bob Bain. And I don't know if you're all familiar with the name Bob Bain, but he's a fabulous professor at the University of Michigan who has led us on much of the work we have done. He helped create this tool. And he is very into anytime you can make cards. So if you could have kids list all their causes on separate note cards and start to move them around and recategorize them. I think is another great way to go. You can also take cards and make those cards into causal maps, which can be a fun thing to do. So yeah, I think anytime you can get a manipulative going with this kind of stuff, it is a huge win. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's one of the big things we talked about in my group. I have very low, I'm in a very rural district with a very wide range of abilities in the classroom. And I find that this tool is a little cumbersome for them, either not enough room to write in, or realistically to have instruction and then time to do it where they actually get good think time. So when I try this again, I'm going to kind of make the tool into a massive manipulable, and somebody just dropped the whole like hexagonal thinking in. I might use it to introduce hexagonal thinking next year along with this. And so they have like short-term, long-term, intermediate-term, long-term on big poster boards that they do in small groups, and then can like go about talking about each other's. But time is a problem for this one, honestly. And just going at it using this. I also want to give a plug to the community chat rooms, because there's some people out there that have done manipulables that are pretty kind of cool. And so they're all like, if you type in causation on the community, it will show up with some people who have some really fantastic ideas on this.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Greer. That's a fabulous idea. All right. Does anybody else have anything else? Do want to move on so we don't run out of time here at the end. But I love these. It's the best part of this is hearing how everybody does this. So does anybody else have any ways that they have, before we talk about other scaffolding, does anybody else have anything they want to comment about that happened in their groups, or any other scaffolds that people came up with? These are just fabulous.
Well, I'll try to keep it quick. Our group, I'm going to push back, not push back, but you made a great case for being able to change the short-term, long-term, or intermediate term and long-term definitions. In our group, we decided we struggled with that, or we that's where we spent our time. We didn't get much further past that. And because we stuck with that long-term definition, I think it was Susie in our group pulled something that wasn't even from the text, but fit beautifully. And that was putting in there the human use of beasts of burden. So even though that wasn't in the text, because we kept that definition from 100 years to all time, that would force our kids to go beyond the text and perhaps even pull in something that they learned previously in a classroom, in the class.
Yep. I love that. That's a great point. And I think that also really comes into play too when we think about things like geography. And how location, geography, and other things can impact how we think about causation. So wonderful.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to put in a plug for the Jamboard, because the Jamboard really works. Like in the beginning, you brainstorm, about the causes, and then you can have them add the time, and then put them into time, and then add the roles and add, significance and stuff. I didn't get to type, but because the time frame, but that, and also it can be used as a group or do it individually, because we have a lot of UDL, so that, like, you want to have individual time or small group time. And so that really worked. And then if you have it on the Jamboard, you can just pull it up when you need them to remember about causation.
Yep. I do love a good Jamboard. Oh, they're so great. And it is so, and it is the being able to go back and see what's there and all of that, which is, I think, also helps if you're a teacher that's got shorter class times. It really helps with that continuity piece without having to get people to really fully get back into it every single time. So yeah, I think it's a fabulous way to do this. I love it. Outstanding. Well, Pete, I see lots of activity in the chat, and please keep throwing in your ideas there about how you differentiate and how you change things, because that is the core of what we love to see people doing. I'm going to keep going so we don't totally run out of time here, and I don't want to keep anybody past time. We so appreciate you being here. So yeah, so there's all these different ways that we've just discussed. So you made a perfect segue for me. Thank you. Into all these different ways we might scaffold causation. So I think you can start with Alphonse. I also think you could start with, how did everybody get here today? Which can be a really fun to do a class. So you could do a class causal map of just how did everybody get here? And you could even, once you have things categorized, you can even make it a live causal map if you want. You as, the classroom is maybe the middle node, and then students could arrange themselves. It can get a little crazy, but it could be a fun way to kick that off. So, and as you said, you can take cards, you can have manipulatives. Another thing that we like to do sometimes is if, especially when time is of the essence. And for example, maybe you've had your kids list cause, your students have listed causes and you've done it 3 times and they've got that down. So maybe you give them a partially filled out tool so that they can get to the other things. Or maybe you start with a partially filled out tool where you've already listed the causes, and you just on that day, maybe you're just working on type or role or something like that. So I think that's another way that you can take these and scaffold them. And then sometimes you can do that, you can differentiate within the classroom where maybe some students are really far along and they can have a blank tool, and maybe some other kids need a little more support, and so they get something that's partially filled out. So however it works where you are is how I suggest you do it. But lots of great ideas out there on how to do that. So we've talked about these, and we can take a couple more questions, but are there any other ways that people teach these that we haven't talked about, that anybody else wants to share, maybe that has nothing to do with Alphonse or nothing to do with the causation tool? If you've tried things in your classroom, I know there's a lot of people here who have taught history for a very long time and who have great approaches, and we encourage you to continue to use your great approaches. We encourage you for us to fill in gaps or other things when you're sort of like, I don't have a great approach to this, I want to try this. So any other tried and true things that anybody comes up against? And then the other question I have would be, and it's not on the slide, but other than, sort of the issues around monocausal reasoning, which often is kind of the pain point, I think, for in a lot of classrooms, is it's the dominoes, right? This led to this, led to this, led to this. And when I was filling out a causal map the other day, actually, I did this with another group recently, I noticed I took a little time and I did 2, and one of them had a bunch of different causes going into my main event. And then the other one was chronological. And I thought, well, what am I doing here? How does this work? So, any other major pain points beyond that sort of monocausal reasoning that people are seeing that other people might have solutions for? All right, well, that's okay. The other thing I do want to mention in terms of scaffolding is that if you are teaching one of the World History Project courses and you feel like, oh, this progression is a little bit too much for my students right now, you could go into World History, you could go to the Big History Project causation progression. And that we feel is a little more, it's targeted for learners who are a little bit younger, maybe not as far along. And so there might be some activities in Big History that could serve to help you scaffold even more. So, or even, more opportunities to practice causal mapping or other kinds of things. So if you're in the Big History class, Alphonse actually ends the causation progression. And if you're in the World History class, it starts the causation progression. So that's just something to consider. And we do have sort of these, and I'm going to go to the next. So you see this, it's probably really hard to see this graphic. It looks like all the grid. We call it our practice progression placemat. And we have one of these placemats for every course. So you can kind of look across and see the activities that are in that progression. So if you did feel like you needed to provide more support for learners and wanted to look at the big history one, you can pull up the placemat and see exactly where each of those activities is listed in that course. So, and yes, kids do love to talk about themselves. So always, anything you can start with they talk about themselves is good. I think the course kicks off with draw your history or history of me, and it's just kids talking about themselves. It's a great way. And then it's a great way to get to know them too, which is always important. So, as you're thinking about, perhaps using causation or you're using it, there's some different resources that we do have on the site if you wanted to dig in more. So we do have what we call Teaching World History, which is basically a self-service, choose your own adventure, learn about the courses kind of a thing. There's videos, there's posts, there's articles. You can go in, you can take the course if you want, or just learn if there's just one, progression or skill you're interested in learning about. Like if you're looking at CCOT and aren't quite sure how to teach it, you can go to Teaching World History and get some tips. And then there's often posts from different teachers who have tried different modifications and different things. So it's a great place to learn about that kind of stuff. And then the other thing, which somebody else already plugged, but that we do think that I think is one of the most valuable parts of what we have, is our teacher community. And it really is a place where people are sharing lessons, they're sharing modifications. People sometimes share their entire Google Drive where they've taken some of our materials and modified them for their classrooms. I think we've all been in the situation where we go, oh no, I've got to teach this tomorrow and I'm not ready. And if you go into the community and you ask a question, generally somebody chimes in and gives you an answer, or say, hey, check out this resource, or I tried this thing. People are also really good about sharing, not as much because I think you're all wonderful, but I mean, I've had plenty of lessons that have bombed in my time. And so sometimes people will share out, I tried it this way, it didn't go so well. So lots of great stuff. If you're getting ready to teach something, I definitely go look at the community for that. I saw a note, we will send a follow-up email after this where we'll share different links and assets and all of that. So there we go. And then, here's just a screenshot of just 2 causation conversations from the community. So there we go. This is, I don't know, I'm not sure why that slide's there, but that's just the periodization of the course. Here is again a picture of that placemat. And then, the last thing we would love for you to do, we'll stick around and take questions if people have them. But if someone, I don't know if somebody has the link to the survey, but, I said I do that, but I also do our evaluation. And we want to make sure that we so value your time and thank you for coming. And we want to make sure that this is a useful experience. So if you could give us your, most honest feedback about how the session was, we'd love to hear it. It's like 3 questions. It's very, very short. And then you are always welcome to email us with additional questions. You can always email help@oerproject.com, and that goes to a whole lot of people, and we will respond very quickly. And any kind of question you have, we will field, or we'll get directed to the right person who can answer that question for you. So thank you so much for being here. It was lovely to see you. I know everybody's tired and working a lot, and I hope some of you are on a midwinter break right now. But it was wonderful to see you, and we so thankful for your participation. We really appreciate it.